Alex,
Yes, sir.
sometimes you wonder what animals have good PR versus bad PR, every animal's got a stigma to it, I feel like.
Yeah.
So, my question to you is what animal do you think has an undeserved negative PR, and what animal has an overhyped positive PR?
Well, the first thing I want to go for is that one. It's that endangered like lemur thing, and where's it? Like Africa or Madagascar. Got the really big eyes, really long
The
fingers.
loris, or the eye,
The eye, yes.
with the crazy long fingers. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. That has like a very negative PR, but that there's a whole lot of cultural history that goes with that.
It's just a freak.
They are kind of freaky looking. I will give them that, but they've gotten a lot of negative press for no reason.
Yeah.
And then something that's way overhyped, that one's a lot harder.
See, when I think of overhyped, I think like the hippo, because like if you're outside of like our sphere, you see a hippo and you're like, oh, that's a little, it's a little bit like Mudang.
Yeah,
It's a little baby hippo. And like if you think about it, a pygmy hippo is like just as bad as a normal hippo. They're just a
yeah,
little bit smaller,
they're
and
just smaller.
which makes them even worse because you're like almost less afraid to go up to it, but
And
they
then
have the
it
same
munches you.
vibes of a normal.
Yeah, they're just all violence.
Yeah,
The most violent animal on the planet, and they are herbivores.
yeah, they're scary.
Yeah, they
They're
will
afraid they will take you
mess
down.
like they will. I've seen videos of them just dunking on Nile crocodiles, like one of the biggest reptiles, just dunking on them because like one went after like a baby hippo and then the whole herd of hippos. So think like 50 just mountains descending on this crocodile, and it was a bad day to be that crocodile.
So
It was his ticket got punched for him.
yeah, multiple times.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So the reason I bring that up is because it kind of ties into our nature in the news.
Yes, and that's why I avoided saying like the turkey vulture
Yes,
because
today.
as kind of gross looking as they are, they do serve a very important role, and that is we're not talking about turkey vultures today, but we're talking about vultures.
Yes, today's nature in the news is about vultures and kind of like their negative press and why they're actually like important. So if you haven't seen a turkey vulture before, they're kind of gross looking. They have a featherless head, which helps them a lot because they feed on like carrion and carcasses of dead organisms, oftentimes larger.
Mostly larger like animals. So like roadkill, those you see them a lot along like where roadkill, especially bigger like around here, you see especially this time of year, see a lot of dead deer on the side of the road.
Right.
And with that comes a lot of things like crows and turkey vultures because they eat from them.
Yes. So, but there was a time where the turkey vulture was seen as not exactly the greatest thing. So they kind of had a population decline. But then as the population declined, there was a lot of problems that opened up from this because you're not having a detritivore. So like if you look at a trophic pyramid, there's like the producer, consumer, and then along the side of the pyramid is kind of the detritivores. That's like the mushrooms and like the vultures and other things that feed on the dead organisms that send the energy back to the base level in a way.
Yes.
So without that, you have, in this instance, you have a lot of dead carcasses that just sit around with nothing to clean up after them. Problem with that is these carcasses cause a lot of diseases. So one of the main talking points of this article is in India, a lot of vultures got poisoned because there was a type of antibiotic or some type of medicine they were using on the cow populations there that was actually toxic to vultures, kind of similar to like a DDT in America poisoning some of our larger bird species. But as a result, millions of vultures died. Lots of animal corpses came around, which those like germs and things like that seeped into the water systems because nothing was cleaning up the corpses, which led to a lot of sickness in humans as well as rabies. There's a lot of wild dogs in India because there's such a large population that there's not really any animal control. So your dog just go like if you have a stray dog, it eventually becomes a feral dog, and there's large wild dog populations.
And with that, all those dead carcasses now, it's more for the dogs to feed on.
Yeah. So then there's more rabies cases because of the dogs that are feeding on these corpses. And rabies is not a fun time for anybody involved. So that being said, these vultures, since they have such bad PR, the urge to return them back to their previous population was not as high as a priority as it should have been because, I don't want to put blame on any individual NPO or anything like that, but there's like keystone species for conservation, like, rhinos, elephants, gorillas, pandas, things of that nature that are like, oh, these are the things that everybody likes, so we want to conserve that. We want to put more resources into conservation of those species versus conservation of the vulture, obviously.
Yeah.
So now we're getting to the point of fixing the problem. A couple decades after it happened, obviously.
Yeah.
Nonetheless, it's coming around, but that's today's Nature in the News, talking about how negative PR on a species kind of affects the conservation as well as our like outlook of them as a whole.
Yeah.
But this article was published by Nat Geo, National Geographic,
Yeah.
on June 3rd. And it was written by AJ Jacobs. There's a lot of other things in this article. They talk about sloths and
Yeah. The big thing, like the kind of the push for animals like this is kind of doing it's something is called the ugly cute, quote unquote, which the prime example for that is the blobfish. Like if you've ever seen a blobfish pulled out of its deep ocean habitat, they are very ugly, but it's one of those like they've kind of become an internet sensation sort of thing just because like they become a meme basically, and it's
hmm
one of those things where they're trying to see like how can we do that to like vultures or some of those what they described as the D-list organisms that are the ones that aren't talked about really in like pop culture, ones that aren't really cared about, but some of them are actually much more important than the ones that people do care about. Like yes, elephants and rhinos and that they are important, but these are a lot of these species are the ones that are carrying out like the important tasks. Like vultures are cleaning up, and without them, India is a prime example. It gets kind of gross and nasty real fast, and without that, it's causes a lot more than just like, oh, there's animal carcasses left that just rot. They take longer to slow down because, like Tyler said, those carcasses then develop into like the bacteria and everything develop, and there a lot of those bacteria that do break that down are bad. They cause a lot of diseases, and that as it rains, it washes all that into the waterways and then becomes part of the drinking water, especially in less developed nations that don't treat their water quite as well. And because of that, it definitely becomes a problem.
yeah. So that's going to do it for today's Nature of the News. Alex, thank you for helping me cover some bases there that I didn't
Yes.
quite get to. But we're going to move on into our lesson for the day. Today, we're talking about something we talked about a couple weeks ago, although kind of different. So we talked a couple weeks ago about marine smelts and deep sea smelts. Today, we're talking about freshwater smelts, which, spoiler alert, it's kind of a weird name for them because a lot of time they are also in marine habitats. They're kind of what we talked about last week. They live part of their lives in freshwater as well as part of their lives in marine water. Was that anadromy? Yeah,
That's an
that's
excellent.
one of them.
I forget off the top of my head.
That's one of the migration patterns in anadromy. I just forget which one it
Yes,
is.
yes, anadromy. Yeah,
Yeah. Um.
anadromous. They live their lives in the sea but travel to freshwater.
Yeah. So, with that being said, well, let's get into our lesson for today. Alex, would you like to start with just a general overview of the order as a whole?
I can do so. I've got a picture on deck. So we were talking about the osmeriforms. Now, they said the freshwater smelts are also known as the true smelts, which may be a little bit more accurate to the group instead of just the freshwater smelts like Tyler had said before. So this contains two suborders with four families, and those families have 17 genera covering 52 species. So not a gigantic group compared to some of the fish groups that we've talked about so far, but not a small one either. It used to contain those marine smelts we talked about a few weeks ago, as well as the galaxids, but now they've been separated into their own group. These are typically small to mid-sized fish, very slender in appearance, as you can see in the picture. They do possess that adipose fin. Um, I believe, if I remember correctly, it's that one that's just kind of chilling there in front of the tail fin on the bottom.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. It is oftentimes reduced.
Those are teeth. My bad. Missed a word in the bullet.
Teeth are oftentimes reduced or missing. They're articular and mesopterygal.
Yeah, those are the specific teeth that are missing.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'm not familiar. I don't
I don't
with
know where
how.
those are placed in the fish's
Okay.
mouth, but those are the teeth that are oftentimes either reduced or missing, or the
Okay.
articular and mesopteryg.
Okay. And the scales lack radii. Those like
That's a good question.
yeah, look that up. We're all learning a lot of new words today. Um, and like Tyler said, although they're named the freshwater smelts, they are generally marine, and they do have migration patterns like we talked about, where they migrate into the freshwater to spawn. They're typically found in the temperate oceans worldwide. It's not. It's more of a uh, like the further north and south, away from the equator, is where you're going to see those. So something like we would see off of the Atlantic or Pacific coast here in North America, that's pretty much all temperate waters, or around like Europe, that like western coast of Asia or eastern coast of Asia, so like Japan, China, areas like that. Um, that will take this into our four families for today. So our first family is Retropinidae, unless if you have that, what the red eye mean for the
Uh,
scales.
Not yet.
Okay.
But go ahead. I'll go ahead and talk about these. So the Retropinidae is a family of freshwater spouts. These guys are found in the southern hemisphere in the waters of Australia and New Zealand. Their closest related member is the family Osmeroidae, which we'll talk about in a couple minutes here. Although they're not as related to Thymolus, which is another group, I believe. Most members inhabit fresh or salt water, typically going back and forth between the two. And the three genera we have for them are Retropina, which is Retropina simoni, Retropina tasmanica, and then Prototroctus has P. Morena, and then Stokelia has S. Anisodon as its members. So 5 members total within the group.
Yeah.
And that'll lead us into our second family for the day, which is Osmeridae.
Yeah. So Osmeridae, these are your typical smelts when biologists talk about smelts. This is kind of the first kind of thing that would pop into someone's head. And they are found in the North Atlantic and North Pacific, as well as the freshwater systems along those surrounding continents, Europe, North America, and Northeastern Asia, as I talked about before. Most of them rarely exceed 20 centimeters in length, so they're relatively small. There are some European smelt. The females of the European smelt can reach up to 40 centimeters, but I'm sure those are some very specific cases that you don't see a whole lot of. Um, and here we have 6 genera covering a handful of species. The first genus is Allosmeris, which is one species that is the whitebait smelt. The second genus is Hypomesis. This covers 5 species. You have Hypomesis japonicus, which and then there's the Japanese smelt, which is not that, contrary to what it sounds like, that is a different species. The pond smelt, the surf smelt, and the delta smelt. The next genus has 1 species, as the genus Melotus, with Melotus villosus, or the capelin. The following after that, the genus Osmeris has 4 species: the European smelt, the rainbow smelt, which we'll talk about a little more later, Osmeris spectrum, and the Pacific rainbow smelt. So there's the rainbow smelt, it's also called the Arctic rainbow smelt, and then the Pacific rainbow smelt. So closely related, but not the same species. The next genus is Sporincus. There are 3 species: the Shishamo, the night smelt, and the longfin smelt. And then our last genus is Thalichthes, and that is has 1 species and is the candlefish. So that'll lead us then into our third family,
Yeah,
Placoglossidae.
that third family, as Alex said, Plecoglossidae, they're known as the ayu or the sweet fish. This is the only species within that family. They are native to East Asia, ranging from Japan, specifically like I believe it's the Hokkaido area, all the way to Korea, China, and Vietnam. So what is that like? That's like the South China Sea area they inhabit.
Yeah, Southeast Asia.
Moving between marine waters and freshwater rivers, there are a few populations that exist in landlocked regions. So that means they spawn entirely in one lake. They don't exhibit that same anatomy that a lot of these other species within this order do. They are omnivorous. They feed on algae, crustaceans, insects, and worms. So how that works is they have very saw-like teeth, and similar to what have we talked about before it does this? Like a loach will kind of like scrape it off the rocks in these rivers. Right, Alex? That's what we talked about that does that? Something like
Yes.
that, like a mountain loach type thing.
Yes.
And as I said, they breed in rivers. Those landlocked populations do, but will breed in the lower rivers. And then as the eggs hatch, the larvae kind of drift off into the sea, and from there they will start to grow and develop and mature before coming back to the rivers to spawn. And that'll lead us into our final group for today, Solangidae.
Yes. These guys are funky.
I thought so. Based off there you go.
Yes. So Solangidae, these are known as the noodle fish or the ice fish. So we can talk about that a little bit more. These are found primarily in Eastern Asia as well, but a lot of the coast from Russia to Vietnam, but they show their most species richness near China. They're slender, translucent to transparent, have little to no scales. They have a very strongly depressed head, as you can see in the picture, very small head, but they do have a lot of teeth packed in that little head. They're believed to be neotenic, which means they retain a lot of their larval features, such as their skeleton is only partially ossified, which means the bone is not fully hardened the way typical bones are, which is something that a lot of the larval in a lot of fish species, it hardens as they grow. They tend to mature rapidly. They possess a high fecundity, which I believe means they reproduce a lot, quite.
They have a high fertility rate, yes.
Yeah,
They're capable of reproducing quickly.
yeah. But they only live about a year, so they don't live very long. But there are a lot of them, and they do a good job at what they do. There are 6 genera covering about 15 species, give or take. There's 3 monospecific genera. The first is Hemisalanx with Hemisalanx brachyrostalis. The next genus is Neosalangichthes with N. Ishikawa, or the Ishikawa icefish. The next genus is the largest genus, Neosalanx. that covers 9 species. I'm not going to try to read all their names because it's going to get
There's a
really,
lot. They're
yeah,
they're kind of dense too.
they're difficult names. Next is protosalanx. There are 2 species, protosalanx chinensis and protosalanx hyalocranius, or the clear-headed icefish. Our next genus is a monospecific genus, Salangichthyes, with Salangichthyes microdon. And then our last genus is Salanx, with 5 species. Yes, 5 species, so I'm making sure I can count. In these, there's the Chinese noodlefish, as well as just the noodlefish, are 2 of those species. And as you can see here, they're very, very small. If I remember correctly, are these not also some of the ones that have their blood is clear, or am I thinking of different ice fish?
I think it's a different ice fish because I think
Okay.
those ones are a bit larger and live,
Near the
more in an
poles.
Arctic circle. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So I don't know if we'll talk about them, or
Eventually,
maybe, yeah.
obviously.
If not, we'll have to maybe make them an amazing species, even if they're not on
Yeah,
the red
they'll
list, just because they're cool.
they'll come up.
But
But
with that, we can go right into our recurring segments. The first of those being our amazing species. Tyler, if you would like to cover.
before we go into our amazing species and all our recurring segments, I'd like to bring up the fact that a lot of these species we talked about are very important food fish for a lot of different cultures. The ice fish, the noodlefish are very popular sushi fish, sashimi fish,
Yeah, let me.
as well as some of them smelt species that we talked about are popular. There, Alex has pulled up some type of noodle fish sushi.
That is what it looks like. That's kind of wild. But you can see kind of how small they are.
Yeah,
A
there's a
lot of the
lot of
species
them in there,
are relatively small.
as well as some of the smelt species we talked about, specifically the ones that live around like the European area and stuff, are similar food fish to like, I think they're packaged similarly to like sardines or anchovies, where they kind of like throw a whole bunch in a pack with some type of like oil or something. It's my knowledge of them. I'm not quite 100% sure, so don't come at me for it. But yeah, just want to bring that up before we get into our recurring species segments. Move into our amazing species. As Alex said, we're going to be talking today about the New Zealand Grayling, which is in that Prototroctus genus. It's one of the first ones we talked about that live, obviously, in that southern hemisphere, New Zealand area. These guys are currently extinct. I don't know why I said currently, because they're never really going to come back from that. But they used to live all throughout New Zealand, both on the North and South Island. However, about the late 18th century, I think, early 19th, maybe early 19th, or late 19th, early 20th is what I'm thinking. When Europeans started to go to Australia and New Zealand, this fish became under some heavy fishing pressures, as well as like deforestation and things like that. Since they did live in a freshwater habitat, those are kind of one of the more, what's the word I'm thinking of here? Like, not restricted, but like more hitter, like fluid habitats where they can come under a lot of pressure really quickly, based off of like threats. So that's what happened was the rapid urbanization from Europeans coming to New Zealand, as well as overfishing and the introduction of European species, kind of led them to that brink of extinction. And it wasn't exactly the slowest thing you've ever seen. In the 1860s, it was widely abundant. So mid to late 19th century, there was a lot of them. And then by 19 by the 1920s, there was only about 1 or 2 shoals left over. And in the 1930s, possibly the last specimen was brought to the British Museum, but there was no notation of collection or
Date when it was
date.
collected.
Yeah, yeah,
So they don't know if it was one that someone had for a while, or if it was like one of the last ones that was caught.
yeah. And as I said, there's not really any one reason why this went extinct. A list of factors typical of a lot of things that are under a lot pressures of a extinction. But this was a very popular sport fish during its time, typically caught in the hundreds per day. Since it's a smelt species, smelt, if you didn't know, is one of the few species that you can like just kind of catch by net.
Yeah, they typically school
Yeah,
pretty.
I think it's called like smelt dipping. Maybe is like a term for it. But that's gonna do it for my amazing species, Alex. If you'd like to take us home for our most wanted, we kind of hinted at it a little bit earlier in
Yes,
this in the show.
indeed. I will pull up a picture. So we're talking about the rainbow smelt. It's one of those. It's sort of an invasive species, but not much. Not as intensely as some of the others that we've talked about. So they are, as you can see, kind of a silvery, pale green back, white underside on the fish. The sides can be like a very bright purple, bluish pink with that silvery stripe. So that's why they're called the rainbow smelt.
That looks very monocolored to me there.
Yeah, I think that might just be the picture. You can kind of see right above the lateral line. There's a little bit of purpley, pinkish blue coloration up in here.
What is the yellow?
Probably eggs,
That's what I was thinking.
if I had to guess. So they have, as you can see, they have your typical smelt characteristics with the big dorsal fin and the adipose fin and a deeply forked tail fin. They have a pointed, well-developed snout. They have very sharp canine-like teeth on the tongue and the roof of the mouth. So they kind of resemble minnows a little bit. However, the minnows lack the adipose fin and as well much of the teeth. So they're can get relatively large, about 100 to 350 millimeters. So that'd be like 10 to 35 centimeters. So as far as smelts go, pretty average to decent size. They are native to the northeastern Atlantic coast in the United States and the river drainages there. So like the Delaware River,
Chesapeake.
not quite that far south. They're not native
Mm,
to there, but like the Hudson, the Delaware, areas like that, and some of the larger lakes, like Lake Melville and Newfoundland. But they have been introduced throughout much of the Northeast and the river drainages there through the Midwest of the United States, such as the Great Lakes, the Mississippi and Missouri rivers, parts of the Monongahela to the Ohio rivers, Allegheny, a lot of the major river systems in the United States. Thought to be originally introduced kind of as like a bait fish or like through the Erie Canal, where they were able to travel over to the Great Lakes, as well as there's a specific lake that they referenced, the Crystal Lake in Michigan, which drains into Lake Michigan. So they were able to escape from Crystal Lake, get into Lake Michigan, and then they spread very rapidly through the Great Lakes as well as their tributaries. And from there, it expanded out into those other river systems as I talk about, all the way south to Louisiana, Kansas, even into areas like North Dakota. They have been very successful in those areas, considered pretty somewhat important prey species for the salmonids, so like the trout and salmon related species in those areas. But they are, because they are so abundant, they are slowly affecting some of the the native species such as the lake herring in the Great Lakes, which is kind of outcompeting for that, as well as indirectly the extinction of the blue pike because it allowed for the salmonids to become so much more widespread because it was an easy prey species for them. But overall, it has not been quite as impactful as some of the other invasive species. They are something that is eaten. They are actually a very popular commercial species in the Great Lakes, like a year round. There's enough of them that they can be targeted year round. They have been for quite a long time, but because they are so abundant in some areas of like the Mississippi River, they were some of the most abundant fish that were found in some sampling.
So they're not quite invasive. They're more like an introduced species in some areas, but
Yes,
invasive in other areas.
correct. Yeah, and they because of that kind of the impact they've had on those areas, it's not quite as detrimental because they are such a significant prey species and something that is readily eaten by a lot of the native fish, but it's still impactful enough, like as I said, indirectly, it's allowing some of the more predatory fish to outcompete other native fish that would have been nice to keep around. But that is all I have for these guys.
So
Pretty not quite as exciting as some of the other invasive species we've had, but that will bring us to our final segment for today. And that is
you
our
know,
go ahead.
sometimes I don't know if I should be amazed that you have found so many most wanted species, or appalled that this many exist.
Yes,
Because
is
this
the
is our
answer.
40, almost 45th episode, and you've had a most wanted for every single
Yeah,
episode.
some of them I had to stretch a little bit. Like this one has stretched it a little bit, but
But
not
that's just so you can keep it within the discussion topic of the day.
correct. Yeah, so I kind of had to stretch it a little bit. Not usually I'm able to find something at least,
Yeah,
even if it's not quite related to what we're talking about.
but that'll move us into our final segment for the day. We will
Yes,
be
sir.
talking on ecology I almost forgot the name. Ecology encyclopedia for the day.
Yes.
This one's kind of a broad subject.
Yeah, it's a bit of a doozy. So today we're talking about biomes, specifically
Which
terrestrial biomes.
terrestrial? Perfect. That's what I was
Yes.
going to ask.
So this goes a lot with when we have talked about like ecosystems in the past. This is how many of them, in a broad sense, are classified. But like, if I remember correctly, biome is like your ecosystem classification. Biome is kind of your broadest uh, classification of that. And then it
Yeah.
filters down to like all the way down to an individual organism. It goes from like biome down to like a ecosystem to like a population or like
It goes, it
yeah,
goes individual, population, community,
yeah.
and then it goes ecosystem, which has all the biotic and abiotic factors. Then the
Okay.
biome. So a biome is that most broad thing you can talk about.
Yes.
So like the difference for us would be like, okay, we live in Pennsylvania, so that's one of the most common biomes around us is like a deciduous forest.
Yes.
Ecosystem for that would be an Appalachian deciduous forest.
Yes. Yeah. So specifically a temperate deciduous forest because there are temperate rainforests which we can are kind of not
Yeah, but that's a very niche
yes they are
biome.
very specific biomes but so on I kind of pulled up an image here to kind of help describe what that is so you go it's kind of they classify them in this is an easy way you see in like textbooks how the biomes are classified. So your most tropical, your warmest environments are going to be like the rainforest, which of course is very wet. That's why they're called the rainforest. And then moving as you get drier in those tropical areas, you have more of a tropical seasonal forest where you get a little more of a dry season, like more defined wet and dry seasons. Because even in like true rainforests, The dry season is just less wet.
Yes.
But a
The dry season in a tropical rainforest is typically the time when the actual forest itself is not flooded by the river system.
a lot of times, yes, much less wet. And then you start getting into areas like scrubland and savanna, which are intermediate. Like scrubland is like kind of that intermediate wet and dry. It does get some rain, but not enough to support like tree growth. The savanna, you start seeing more dry weather adapted species.
And that goes for plants and animals. So,
Correct.
like, yeah, the savanna has some tree species like acacias and things, and baobabs, stuff like that, but they're well adapted to a low rain environment.
And then you get your tropical deserts. So when you think of like the deserts in Africa or Southeast Asia, where you think it's just sand, that is like a tropical desert. There are temperate deserts, especially like the ones that are in North America, and as well as some in South America, where you get like things like cacti and like burning bush is not. That's a different thing entirely. But like
Like
cacti is the
agave, the succulents,
yes,
things like
yes,
that.
like yeah, like cacti, agave, where they get a little more rain and it's not quite as hot as like the tropic or a tropical desert, but it's still very hot, pretty dry. And then you start getting into things like grasslands. So the like the American Midwest, you consider that like the plains, where it get rain, but it's not enough, and it's typically pretty flat. And then like the chaparral is more of a transitional. Um, where you start getting more of that rain, but a lot of those tend to be kind of rockier. They have intermittent periods of like dry and wet, and then you get wetter into like how we live, the deciduous forest, like a temperate deciduous forest. I believe I'm gonna peek. That is one of. Okay, never mind. It's not. It is a pretty widespread type of biome, but not the most widespread, I would say.
No, I would say that's more of a carnivorous forest because if you think of it,
Yeah.
nearly all of Canada and all of northern Europe and Asia is coniferous forest.
Yes, that's pretty big areas. But deciduous forest, that's when like you start seeing like how we experience actually like four true seasons, where you have like the summertime as it is now, where it's very hot, gets a lot rainier. Then you get into like spring and fall, where spring you get more rain, fall it's drier, and things start to die off, and then we experience a true winter as well, where like we get snow and all the deciduous trees drop their leaves for the winter time. Um, and then as you get colder, you start getting a little further north, you get into like coniferous forest, also called the boreal forest. This is where you start seeing some of the things like you see in northern Canada, Alaska, where you just see acres upon acres of like pine trees, spruce trees, things like that, where it's all those, and they're all evergreens, but they also see a lot more snow. And because of that, the reason that the evergreens thrive is because they are shaped in a way that allows the snow to fall off, doesn't break the tree branches, and the needles are very waxy. It helps them hold in the water, because just as much as dry weather uh, cause problems for plants losing water, so can cold, because as it gets colder, you get less humidity, less water in the air, like the humidity. So
So they have to hold on to it.
correct,
It's not as much of a it's gonna evaporate off of them. It's more of a there's not as much in the water. There's not as much water in the air.
correct. Yeah, and these areas you don't quite see permafrost yet, but you're getting there, and that's what will take us into the tundra biomes, which is like right below the poles, where you still see plant life, but it's typically very small, very slow growing.
Mosses, lichens, things like that. Things that stay low to the ground, don't require a lot of energy to grow. A lot of times it's more or less spore fights and bryophytes.
Yes, or like some very low grasses, shrubs, maybe some small trees, but not a lot because that cold, a lot of times with that cold and being kind of flatter, open areas, you get a lot more wind and it tends to break tall.
Plus, the permafrost doesn't exactly allow for
Yes.
strong root systems to develop.
Yes. This is where you start seeing a lot of things like those big, like peat bogs, things of that nature. So I will then take us to a kind of a map. This is kind of how the globe has been mapped out for those different biomes. So you can see Pennsylvania, where we live, is kind of in this area right here, where my mouse is at. You can see that's temperate forest, specifically temperate deciduous forest. They haven't separated out because here in the American Northwest, you get some actual temperate rainforest just because of the way the ocean currents being along the coast affect the weather. They get a lot of rain up there.
Yeah, that's a very cool ecosystem biome to talk about.
Yes.
Lots of unique, not so much animals, but there's a lot of unique plants that only live in like what is it, the Olympic Olympus National Park or something's over there,
Yeah.
and there's a lot of unique plants in that area.
Yeah. Yeah. So as you can see, kind of how everything's spread out a lot. You can see it like in Africa, a lot of that it's very dry for the most part. So the little bit of the rainforest there in that western central part of Africa, but a lot of desert, a lot of the savanna and tropical grasslands. Whereas in South America, you see a lot of rainforest, as well as Central America, the Pacific Islands, north of Australia. So it influences a lot of the different plant and animal species that you see. Why a lot of species in similar environments have like look the same, look very similar, kind of fit into similar niches. And this is also where things like invasive species can be studied because those similar environments kind of allow them to be transplanted. So, like here from either like Europe or Eastern Asia, you have the temperate forest. If they get transplanted to North America, it's a very similar environment. They're already used to that, but now they don't have their native predators.
Looking at you, tree heaven.
Yes. So, very interesting. Influences a lot of what we've been talking about, especially once we start getting to a lot more of our terrestrial species. This will really start to tie in a little bit as far as what we talk about, why certain things are in certain areas, how they fill, excuse me, fill in those similar niches.
Yeah, and we say we focused on the terrestrial biomes because there's a lot more things that influence what makes a biome in a terrestrial
Yeah,
uh,
weather is a big is a
yeah, versus a marine ecosystem where really a marine ecosystem just varies based off of how deep you go because of the amount of sunlight that reaches.
yeah, and like water things like water temperature.
Yeah, we've also talked about it already. So
Yeah, a little bit. But that's all I've got for these. Can definitely go more in depth specifically with some of them if you all would like to hear more about them. That can be kind of be an expanded ecology encyclopedia. Can dive into these different biomes more specifically, like what makes a temperate deciduous forest versus a coniferous forest.
right. So that'll do it for today. But before we wrap up and do our little spiel and everything about follow us on X and Y and Z, let's give you a little rundown of like what to look forward to next week. We're going to be talking about the Ateliopodoforms and probably the Alopiforms. That'll be your jelly noses and lizardfish. Those are two separate orders, but they should be small enough that we can kind of group them into one and make it a nice bite-sized episode for you. Uh, but as time for this feel, as we like to say, make sure you follow us on Instagram at Life Complete Story, TikTok at Life Complete Story, We're back to putting clips and amazing species up. Finally, it took us a
Yes.
little bit, but they're back up and running. Follow us on Facebook at Life the Complete Story. Send us an email at lifecompletestory@gmail.com. Make sure to subscribe to the YouTube page at Life the Complete Story. Am I missing anything?
Uh,
That sounds right. That sounds like
yeah,
everything.
I think that's right.
And Alex, what do we always say?
Keep on learning, learn something new. You'll never know what you find interesting. And thank you, everybody, for joining us on another episode of Life the Complete Story. I've been Alex, that's been Tyler, and we'll see you all next time.